So my name is Alex. Welcome to the model building webinar. We'll be going over primarily the import methods and then the design of the printed model shapes. Just send a chat message if anyone has issues hearing or seeing anything, okay? Okay. So starting up, with 3Shape there are a bunch of different methods for importing cases, and it's all based on what licenses you have and where you're getting the cases from. So starting off, the first group is with practices that use the trio system from 3Shape. For that, you'll have the model builder with trios in parentheses for the license, and that'll let you import cases just from trios practices into your trios inbox. The next license is for third-party systems, so that includes companies like the 3M Lava Scanners, Carestream, Itero PlanScan, and Serona. For that, all of those will use the Model Builder third-party license that you'll have in 3Shape. And then the last one is just for importing raw STL files from pretty much any source. And for that, it's the Model Builder All Scans license. Now with each of those, you'll import them into the program in different ways. I'll be able to show you a couple of them, but I'm going to go over in some brief detail. So with the Trios inbox, this is just for Trios practices, and it uses a web service that 3Shape set up. It's 3shapecommunicate.com. Any Trios user or practice can set up an account, and any 3Shape user can set up an account as long as you have your dongle number for your license. Once you've logged into the service, you're able to send your email or get an email from various practices and labs in order to connect on the website. And once you guys are connected, the practice or the Trios user is able to set up an order in their system with any lab that they're connected with. And that way, whenever they're finished with that case, it'll automatically send off to that lab that they've chosen. So you won't technically need to log into the 3Shape Communicate website after you've connected, because it'll automatically just show up in your Trios inbox. The next method is for the third-party system. And most of the import methods are in the Dental Manager screen when you go and right-click and hit the Advanced and Import option. So in here we have a bunch of different systems. Most of the time for the newer import methods, the various systems will now export a .3oxz file. And this is a 3Shape proprietary file that's meant for importing into any dental manager. There are some other methods like 3M's Lava COS, which has the ULDC file, and then Itero, which has a folder that also has a couple XML files that you might need. But most of the systems now are using the 3oxz format. And then because you're importing from a third party, most of the time the order form will have a couple tweaks and changes that'll need to be made, because it's never able to completely transfer over order forms from different systems. And then the last method is the manual import method. And this is how you go about importing STL files. And you can also import DCM, which typically is a 3-shape specific format for standard scan files. So when you import with this method, you'll simply create a brand new order as if you were going to scan it yourself, except you'll set up in the scan settings in the top right for a digital impression and whatever other scans that you actually have for each file. You'll set up the order form exactly how you normally would other than that, and then you'll just hit OK to close out. After you've closed out, you'll have just the case with the blank page icon. You'll be able to right-click, and there should be an option to import scans. And when you do that, the system will read whatever scans that you've chosen in the order form, and it'll have you one by one import each scan file you have. And this method I'll show you in a little bit for an implant case I have prepared. So let's get into this now. I'll start off with a new case that I've imported from my Trios inbox. So I've already accepted this case, but anyone who has a 3-shape Communicate account, in your system settings, you'll set up your login ID and password, and you just have this Trios Inbox tab over here. So you'll go in there and you'll right-click and accept the case, and that brings it into just your Orders tab, like any other case. So I'm going to briefly modify this just so you can see the order form set up. So in here, we have all our standard lab information, patient info. Where it starts to differentiate is the scan settings. So in here, it's set up as a digital impression, and it has both an antagonist and an occlusal alignment. There is an option to just include an antagonist, which may or may not be an issue, depending on what scan files are being imported. Typically from Trios users like this case is, the scans are aligned on the doctor's end, so you don't need an additional occlusal alignment scan, but you are still able to bring one in. Once you set up that up there, you'll go into your order and set up everything else. The crown that I've got here, I've just set up like any standard crown. And then, as long as the order is set up as a digital impression, 3Shape will let you turn on this model section. And right now, I have 2 of these 4 options highlighted. The first one is the section die ditched, and then the die itself. So this is going to create a prep arch, an antagonist, and then a die that fits into that prep arch. I do have additional options in order to create an unsectioned model or a completely cut section model where the die doesn't sit directly into the prep arch. It's completely separated. So now that the order form is set up, I can hit OK and close. But I won't be going directly into Model Builder. Most cases that come in are considered unprepared cases, where the edges of the scan are pretty rough, and the margins aren't directly marked yet. In 3Shape, you'll see that because you'll either have a Trio scanner or a desktop scanner with a yellow exclamation point mark. When you see that mark, that means that it still has some preparation to do. Now to do that preparation, you'll have to go into design, which is the next step for any unprepared case. So I'll do that now. So whenever you do a digital impression case, the workflow typically has you go completely through until the design is finished, and then you're able to go into Model Builder. But what I'm going to do here is I'm only going to go partway through. There's a certain step in the process that you have to complete to before you can go into Model Builder. So I'm not going to complete my design, I'm just going to prepare the model. So it's opened up my design, and it started off on this preparation section up here, and it starts me off for trimming the upper jaw, since that's my prep arch. There is one step that it skips that I'll want to show you for aligning to the bite. This step would not be visible if there wasn't a bite scan, but the doctor did transfer one of those over with this case, so I can click onto that step to verify the bite alignment. So in here I have each of my separate scans here, and I'll be lining them up one by one to this bite scan here. So this is a pretty small bite scan, which isn't ideal, but it should be usable. So I'll just turn on the 3-point alignment. And let's see. So let's start off with our prep. And this is a general tip for lining up anything in 3-shape. It usually does a pretty good job on its own, but you'll get the best results if you position your dots as far away as possible from each other and in a triangle pattern. Sometimes if you position the dots where they form a straight line, the scan can sometimes still rotate. So let's see, so that alignment didn't quite work out for me. So let's try that again. One other thing that sometimes helps is I like to turn off the texture scans a little bit because it helps with actually seeing the shape of the model. So let's preview again. There we go. It's much better. So now that, like any alignment in 3-shape, now that we see that the colors are shifting back and forth, that should be aligned. So I'll go next and move on to the other arch. So let's see. So I'll switch to 3-point alignment again. I'll preview to verify that looks right. And there we go. And I'll just go around and make sure that nothing's poking up through my scans. But no, they look like they're correctly aligned now. So after that's been verified and done, I'll just hit next, and it'll take me back to the trimming step. So an important part of getting a case set up for designing a model is trimming away the excess portions of the scan. If you did not plan on printing a model, you can completely skip these steps and move straight into design. But for printing a model, you'll want your edges to be pretty clean, otherwise you can get a pretty rough-shaped model. So usually the fastest method for me is to completely clear out the green line that it's already got, and then I'll start clicking points where I want my edge to be. So I'll work my way all the way around the model, and I always make sure I'm a little bit away from the edge of the scan. And usually I'll do it from a side view so that I know that everything's going to be mostly level. Then sometimes you'll have some tricky areas here where you've got some floating portions. You'll just want to try and avoid that as much as possible by going around it. Okay. So now that that line is closed again, I can make tweaks and adjustments simply by drawing it as if it were a margin, and it should adjust itself. So now that that's done, I'll hit Next, and just do the same on the opposite arch. So here again, usually the fastest way is generally to clear it out, but you can modify the existing one. It's just sometimes slow with picking up your changes. So usually I'll always get rid of it and then completely draw it again. Okay. Okay. I think this one should be good without any adjustment. So I'll just hit Next. And next is another portion of the occlusal alignment. It sets you up with this plane, which is what's going to determine what portion of your model is flat. So if I had this tilted at a weird angle, the flat portion of my model would wind up extending over here and then up towards the back. So you always want this occlusal plane to be facing down from the occlusion, flat with your model. So the first thing I do, regardless of where the plane starts out, is look at it from the occlusion and hit the Set from View button. That should automatically get it pretty close to your flat plane, and then I'll look at it from side views and adjust it slightly to make sure it's fairly level. The actual height of where this plane is doesn't really matter, so I can have it like this where it's poking through. Usually you just want it to be mostly on the occlusion. So as long as the teeth are mostly lined up and on the occlusion, the main thing is having this level, which it should be usable from here. So I'll hit Next, and I'm still in the occlusal alignment step. It just shows us our scans and antagonist, and confirms with this slider how close the bite is. So ideally, you don't really want to see any red larger than that spot, because the bright red is a point of contact. You can adjust your bite at this point simply by clicking and dragging your scans, or you have the sliders for adjusting the orientation. But usually, as long as you had a bite scan to begin with, you don't really want to change that. So I'll just leave this at the beginning, or make sure it's back to where it was with the Reset button. So I'll continue next, and I have a couple, two more steps that you don't generally do much with. You're able to sculpt each scan data. Now this doesn't have a whole lot of use because typically you don't want to correct the scan because that might lead to some inaccuracies. But it is useful for clearing away any like bubbles or things that you know aren't actually part of your model. Let's see, this scan is actually pretty clean. Oh, here we go. So here's how I might use this feature. I might switch to the Band-Aid or Remove Artifacts tool. You'll paint off an area that kind of looks funny, like this little flap that's on this tooth. and then hit play. And it should get rid of that and smooth out your area. So that's on the opposite side of the arch, so it's not really necessary, but if this were close to a contact, I might use that adjustment. But again, normally you don't generally have to use these tools for preparing your model, so I usually skip right past them. So that's what I'll do now. I'll just hit next. It lets me do it to the lower jaw, but I'm just going to hit next again. The next step is similar to margin marking, but it's actually completely separate. So we see in our list of stages, we have a margin step here, and then we have another margin step over here. This initial margin, the goal is actually in order to section the prep area from the rest of the scan. So if you've scanned unsectioned models, this is similar to that, where you'll click the top of your prep, it'll come up with a margin line, and you'll adjust it so that it's on or slightly outside of the margin. It doesn't have to be directly on the margin. As long as you know that your actual margin line is going to be inside of this border that we're drawing. So at this point, because I can't really see the margin that well from just the scan, at this point it's helpful to turn on the texture a little bit so that I can actually see the dye colors. So I'll just continue drawing, and again, I'm not really worried about having this on the margin as long as the margin is somewhere inside of this line. So let's see. We should have all of our margin now somewhere inside of it, which looks good. So at this point, I can simply go on next. Once you've made that section or margin line, and you're at the insertion direction step, at this point you could continue and complete your crown design and then go into Model Builder. But since we've completed the preparation steps, I can go straight into Model Builder simply by saving with the save disk over here and Xing out. So I didn't want to design a standard crown case right now, so in order to skip that, I'll just save and close out. And now when I right-click the case, I now can either go into Design or straight into Model Builder, which I'll do right now. And you will see this from time to time. This message isn't actually about any issues with the scan. It's mainly about the different material settings from the systems that you're getting the files from. So the Trios user probably has different settings for whatever material was originally chosen from the material that I've chosen right now. So because there's a difference, it's giving us a warning message about that. So I'm just going to hit OK, and it'll move into Model Builder without any issues. So the first step in Model Builder is actually a way to revisit the steps that we've already done. So we have all these different tools that we can go back into for setting up our plane, trimming our scans, or modifying them. But we don't really need to redo that since we completed it, so I'm just going to go right next. here we have the section scan step, and this you might want to refine a little bit. So with this, it gives you your prep covered in blue based on where you marked your line earlier. If you click on the blue prep, you'll see a green or red line show up again. And here it'll be a little easier to see if I turn off the color. So with this, again, I'll just verify that it's somewhere where I want my die edge to be. So with this, I don't actually want this on the margin still. I just want it to be the edge of where I want the prep to be removable. So usually for something like this, I'll have it right where the tooth or the remaining tooth from the preps meets the gingiva, or directly on the margin. So the red line we see is the original one, and the green one is the one that I'm changing. So when you see things like this where you have, without color, a pretty smooth shape, but with color you still see a line of gingiva, that means that the original scan from the doctor might have to be retaken, otherwise the margin might be open. Typically what causes this or jagged sharp shapes near the margin is a lack of enough cord being packed in before scanning, or the saliva or blood from the patient pooling and causing some scanning inaccuracies. In those situations, you can go forward with the understanding that the margin might be a little bit open, or you might be able to suggest to the doctor that they take an additional scan. You'll want to try and have those conversations with your doctors, and usually if they're starting out, they're pretty acceptable to those questions and adjustments. But as they get more experienced, you'll see very quickly the differences in the scanning quality. So I'll continue and make adjustments as long as I'm able to see my margin. And once I'm finished up, I can either hit Next, or I have an additional option to add a neighboring tooth to have that be removable as well. I know from going through this case once before that based on where I've got the margins here, it's going to be a little tricky to remove it without it hitting one of the adjacent teeth. And I'll show you that by going next. So the next step is setting up the insertion direction for the die itself, not for the design. So it gives us a starting off die shape, and I can adjust the path simply by clicking on the prep. And you see a blue wall show up, and that shows you the insertion path for the die. And you'll see, like this gray area here, if your insertion path has it running into one of the adjacent units. And it's actually running into both in this case. So since I know that I'm going to have a little bit of difficulty even if I adjust my direction, I'm going to go back and add an additional removable prep, or I guess an additional removable tooth. So I'll go back to that same section step that we were at before. But this time, I'm going to click on this plus sign to add a neighbor. So I'll click on that, and then I think this one's getting in the way more, so I'll select the top of this bicuspid. It'll come up with a line. Usually it does an okay job of getting where that tooth hits your gingiva. I might bring this a little bit lower. But usually it does a pretty good job on its own. So I'll hit next, and it'll highlight that prep in blue as well. And then I'll just hit OK to go forward. So again, I'm at the die step where I can adjust their insertion path. So I'll click on this one, and since I know that this adjacent tooth is removable, I don't really care if this die goes into that unit's path. I just want to make sure it clears the molar here. And the same with the new removable tooth. I'll click on that, and I'll just make sure that's more towards the other prep than the tooth that it's next to. Now that I've done that, I'll hit the Apply button, and you'll see your dies change directions based on the new insertions that you've given them. After that's done, you'll hit OK. And you'll go into one of the final steps where you set up your articulator. So at this point, it gives you an articulator automatically based on what you had chosen in the order form. I actually left this with a quadrant setting, so it's using the simple quadrant articulator. You have a bunch of different options in here, and I'll show you a couple of them. Usually the ones I find the most people use is the simple articulator methods, where they have these pillars set up on the anterior section and two in the posterior that hold it up. And you'll see they have these little bumps or recesses on each model so that they're able to sit in occlusion. Another one that people use frequently is the 3-shape articulator. So if I switch to the 3-shape full jaw, I usually like to use the fit minus 40 microns because usually it's a little snug otherwise. And this is for a reusable articulator that 3-shape sells. So whenever you've chosen your articulator method, you can then adjust the position simply by rotating it with the red dots or clicking and dragging it. So with this one, I don't have any pins that I'm concerned about intersecting with my model, so I can get this pretty close in. Another feature that we have here is the ID tag. So here, I can type in whatever I want. So let's say model builder webinar. So you'll see that ID automatically show up, and you can adjust it again simply by clicking and dragging it. Usually I want to avoid having my ID tag close to in front of the prep, because sometimes you'll have a hole here made for helping you remove or fully seat the die. Once I've got my articulator and my IDs in place, I'll just hit OK. It'll merge those shapes to your model. And then you'll have a final step where you can add or remove different items. Okay. So now that it's merged all those shapes and it's cut out our IDs from the model, I do have the ability to sculpt this model a little bit more if I wanted to. Usually you don't really need to, so this is just another step that you can just click Next. to go forward. At this point, this is probably the longest wait in the Model Builder software, but it's usually pretty short even for full arches. The longest I think I've seen it wait is about a minute for a large case with lots of preps, where it's subtracting all of the different extra material from the model based on where you've put everything. So here it'll show us our final results for our shapes, and then when I close out, it should generate our STL files. So here I can see it's hollowed out our scans, and it's got our preps here if I turn off our prep model, with some spacing for the dies. So at this point, our model is complete, so I can close out. And depending on your material settings, it may or may not automatically create the STL files. But to make them, if it hasn't done it automatically, is you'll just highlight the case and hit F7. After that, you can go to Advanced, and then we'll show the cam, or explore cam, and we'll see our 4 STL files. So now that that's done, I'll go right into an implant case that I have. So this one I actually took from another case. It was from another 3-shape system, but this should have the same import method that we would for raw STL files. So this one I'm not importing from any inbox, so I'm just going to create a brand new order form. In here, I'll set the case up as I normally would. Let's say test 2. I'll then go up to my scan settings, and I'll say that I have a digital impression. And for this one, I have an antagonist, but I don't have an occlusal alignment, so I'll just choose the antagonist option. And then I'll set up the case itself. So this one I know is on the first molar down here, based on the scan data that I have. I'll set up the implant abutment, which I know is the noble active RP. I'll then set up the model as well. And again, you'll see that it's set up as section die ditched with a die. Even though this is set up as an implant, it will still technically have this option turned on, even though it won't necessarily produce a die. Another thing you'll notice that showed up in the scan settings, a new button showed up for the gingival scan as soon as I chose the abutment option. Now this is where you decide whether or not you have a separate scan for the gingiva and then a separate scan for the scan body, or if you have just one scan with the scan body. I do have separate scans in this case, so I do want this turned on. If not, that's okay, because as long as this option is turned off, when you import your scan and align the scan body, it will cut out the scan body shape from your case so that you're able to continue and design as normal. But since I do have the separated scans, I will leave that on. So now that I've got my orders set up, I'll just hit OK. And I have this blank page icon. Now that that's set up, I can right-click it, and I'll use the Import Scan option. When I do that, a page will automatically pop up for importing my scans. And at the top you'll see which scan it's looking for, because it'll only ever ask for one at a time. So first it wants my gingiva scan. Let's see. So I'll just browse to wherever that's saved. Here we are. So here I have my gingiva scan. It's unprepared, and I don't have occlusal alignment, so I'll leave this checked off. And I'll hit open. Next it wants the antagonist scan, so I'll just browse to where that's saved. And hit open. And it also wants the abutment scan, so I'll browse to where that is and bring that in as well. Now that it's brought everything in, again we have the case ready to go, but it's in the unprepared state, so I'll go into design. So for this, we have the same trimming features and bite alignment features as we did in the other case. So I'll try and skip a little ahead here. So again, we're back to the trimming for this new implant case. So again, just to skip forward, I'm going to clear out the old line and draw a new line for our model. Again, always trying to avoid the outside edges because they can cause some issues for our design. And whenever you see this where not a complete scan of a tooth is taken, I usually will actually try and get just the portion of the tooth that is complete. Okay. So I'll just continue forward and do the same for the antagonist. Again, clearing out and redrawing. And for this one, it does look like we have a bit of missing data here, but it is okay to go around, especially since for this case that's not near our prep or our working area. Okay, that all looks good. So I'll set up my occlusal alignment. Again, at this step, I'll always, no matter what, hit the Set from View button, and then I'll move it into place, simply by clicking and dragging. So that should be good. I'll hit Next. And I don't want to change my bite, so I'll hit Next again. I don't need to adjust my scan data, so I'll just skip past these sculpting steps as well. Now we see that we're at the margin line step, but what we're actually going to be doing is lining up our scan body. So just like any standard scan, we'll use our 3-point alignment, and I'll just pick some spots on each scan. Okay, now that that's lined up, we should be good to go. Now again, at this point, now that we're at the insertion direction step, we could save and close out and go right into Model Builder. I'm just going to run through a quick abutment design just so we can see some other tools that are in Model Builder. So I'm just going to adjust this a little bit so it's a little more obvious in subgingival. Okay. And now that I've completed my quick abutment design, once it saves, I'll be able to jump right into Model Builder. Okay, design completed, saved. So I'll hit what would normally be the close button, but now I'll hit Model, and it should automatically open up Model Builder. A lot of this will function pretty similarly to the other model we did, but there are a couple features that you wouldn't normally see that you will for implant units. So for this, where it would normally have a section to scan, we don't have anything to section since we have our implant here. And this is actually our hole where the implant analog is going to slide into. At this point, the only reason we have this step is to make sure that there's no adjacent teeth that would affect that draw. There isn't based on this angle, so I'll just hit OK. And again, I'll just hit OK since I don't have any dies or removables. Okay. Let's see. It looks like it had an issue with some portion of my scan, so I might need to adjust my trimming a bit. So again, at the beginning of Model Builder, you have all the extra steps that you can revisit. It can be useful when it detects a portion that it's not able to handle, like then. So let's see. Usually the message is about some specific sharp area of the scan, or a hole in the scan data. This arch seems to be good. Remember, the antagonist did have some unfinished areas, so that might be what was causing our issue. So let's see. I'm just going to bring our trimming a little further back away from the problem areas. Okay. So I'll just hit OK, and let's try going forward again. Okay. So it looks like that must have been it. That occlusal plane portion, usually that's where a lot of the more common issues could arise from when it's extending the edges of the scan to the base. So modifying the edges of your scan and resetting that occlusal plane can oftentimes get you past frequent errors. So right now, again, I'm going to set up my articulator choice. So let's say the simple full arch. This one will use the base, so I can't bring this all the way in so that the model doesn't intersect with our pillars. And then I do have an extra feature down here because I actually completed my design. Because I've created an abutment and I know that's going to go subgingival, I'll want to subtract my design from the model that it's making. So as long as this is checked off, it should delete this area, but anything above 2 millimeters from the margin should still be protected and unchanged. So if I hit OK and go forward, we should see that reduction. So again, here's our final sculpt stage where we can review and make further adjustments. I'm going to turn off our design here so I can see that it's cut out down to where my emergence profile is, and then it's made sure that it is still removable by deleting everything above it. But we've still got our contacts, so it should be good for use as a model. Another feature we have, because this is an implant case, is the soft tissue here. So I can click this button. It'll automatically create some soft tissue. Looks like it's created an extra bit as well. So in here, if you clear out everything, I'll just have it replace it, and click on that area, and I have some planes that I can adjust. So I'll just keep adjusting them till I've covered the area I need, but the adjacent teeth are not covered by that same color. Okay. I might want to change that tilt a bit so that it's not as difficult to put in and out. There we go. But now that that's done, I'll hit OK. And it'll section out that shape from the rest of the model. And here I can see the shape that it'll make. This will make a separate STL file for your gingiva. Typically, we would print this separately in the same material as the model, and then from that shape you'd be able to make a negative of it, and then you make the soft tissue from that. So I'll just hit next, and it'll hollow out our model and complete our design. Okay. Now that that's done, we see our final model shapes with their hollowed out. With the implant system that I've chosen from NT Trading, they have specific implant analogs for printed models that will slide into this area and then have a cap that screws onto them from the bottom. So that's how they hold them in place from NT Trading. Some implant libraries may or may not have implant analogs set up similarly. They may have different setups that they use. But as long as they've got what we call DIM analogs, they should be able to be used in 3Shape. So I'll just finish up that design by closing. And then again, I can hit F7 to generate my STL files. And I know we are running up to our time. I just have some other information regarding the manufacturing of your models, and then we can open up for questions. So for model manufacture, most companies would be printing it, but recently there have been a lot of new pucks and strategies coming out that also allows you to mill out your models. Right now, primarily printing is the most economical choice, since the cost of the materials isn't as high, and you don't have a lot of wasted material for printing. But milling can be useful because you won't have to wait for any shipping times if you're outsourcing, and the milling time is typically faster than a printing time anyways. The only problem with that is typically from the pucks that you're milling out of, you can only fit 2, maybe 3 quadrants into a puck at a time. So you wind up having a lot of extra material that you might not be able to use. So typically what we've been doing is we've been doing most of our standard cases printing, and then occasionally for rush cases we'll do milling. So yeah, so I guess right now we'll open up to any questions anyone has. Okay, I see a question from from Michael. He was asking if this was an intraoral scan or a scan of an impression. Both of the cases are from intraoral scans. I believe both were from Trios originally, but the second one was from a converted STL file. Let me see. Another question from another Michael about removable neighbors. You can add as many as you want. So if you keep hitting that plus sign at the die step, you can keep adding additional removables, even if they aren't preps. Let me see. A question about printing times. For different models, it does vary quite a bit depending on what printer you have. For example, our Stratasys printer, I believe it's based primarily on the maximum height. Because printing always happens in layers, you'll find that adding more models doesn't affect the time too much compared to the maximum height of your models. So if we're doing a full batch in our Stratasys printer with just an average height, it can take about 4 to 6 hours. Let me see. For articulator systems, I have a question from Brian. For the articulators that you can choose, there aren't really any other ones that are available from 3Shape to be added, but we have been able to create new model shapes and add them into 3Shape. I haven't heard of a lot of companies adding those into their 3Shape libraries, but it is possible. Regarding the comparison of accuracy between milled models and printed, we find that they're pretty comparable. Obviously, it depends on what mill you're using and what the size of the burrs that it uses. For example, cap strategies will be milled out of a polyurethane material using burrs that go down to the 1 millimeter size. But they still seem to be pretty comparable. They don't seem to have much difference in fit at all. The main difference is that in printing, because it mills in layers, you'll be able to see that compared to milling where it's drilling in a spiral motion. So it's a little more smoother of certain edges. Let's see, I have a question regarding creating the STL files. Let me see. So when you finish Model Builder and it generates the STL files, as long as the file exists, it should be ready for any system that you're going to mill or print it on, as long as it accepts STL files, which most do. They shouldn't be any different from any other raw STL file, except it's a shape without holes in it. So it should be ready to go as soon as you finish Model Builder. Let's see, I do not believe that there are any Ceramco Vertex articulators in there. There are attachments that you can make at the final sculpt step that include the Vertex ball end. So you should be able to add that to one of the articulators, but there's not one made specifically for that. Let me see. So I have a question regarding files that are received from PlanScan. They're saying that sometimes it didn't show them a file to import the scans when they imported the 30XC case. Usually in that situation, that means that the 30XC file itself never contained any scan data. You can confirm that if you have a program like 7-Zip or WinRAR. If you extract the 30XZ file, you'll see all of the case data, and you'll be able to see the scan files themselves. So as long as you see them there, then you should be able to use those to go forward. If you don't see scan files, that means that the case the PlanScan user sent didn't have the completed scans. So that would be the sender of the file in that case. Let's see. So let's see, I have a question about the different licenses. The three licenses that I mentioned, the Model Builder Trios, Model Builder Third Party, and Model Builder All Scans, they are completely separate licenses. So if you have Model Builder All Scans, you aren't able to import Trio scans from your Trios inbox. So you would have to have each version for each type of import that you plan on using. So there is no one model builder that contains the other options. They're all completely separated. Let's see. So I have a question about skipping the crown design. That's what you don't necessarily have to complete any design on a case before you go into Model Builder. You just have to go into design and get up to the insertion direction step. Once you're at that step, you can save and X out, and then you're able to go right into Model Builder without doing any sort of crown design. Let me see. For the simple articulators, unfortunately, you aren't able to remove any of the pins like the anterior ones. The only way to do that would be to make your own custom three-shape articulator file, usually out of STL or DCM files, and you'll plug that into Control Panel. I'm not sure if I see any other questions. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Let me know if you have any other questions. You can email it to our CSM team or ask it on our website on the tech support page. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.